Hello, hello! I am here to share a layout using the Simple Stories Simple Vintage Halloween line. I started off with these pictures of my two girls and our next door neighbor at the time. We've come back from a trick-or-treating back in 2008. Yes, I have lots of Halloween still to scrap. And I picked these because this line has a lot of little vintage imagery of little kids. So I thought that would be a good match. I knew right off the bat that I wanted to start off with a mixed media background. I don't do those as often as I'd like, and it was so much fun creating this one that I really want to do that more. I started off with actual watercolor paper, and here I've been mixing up some water with the Distress Oxide in Spiced Marmalade. And you can see here, I'm putting it on, and there's this blotchiness to the right-hand side. I don't often use watercolor paper. I'm not a watercolorist, so I've learned my lesson. I go back and get another piece, and this time I wet it a bit first. That's going to make everything go on much smoother. And then I use the same brush, extra wetness, and I love how everything just kind of spreads around. So this is looking a lot better for me. I had this idea of having a cluster of the 3 photos on the right, and there are a whole bunch of banners in the collection, so I'm going to use one banner across, and that's why I've painted sort of towards the left. You saw me there spray some water from my Distress ink little water bottle because there's a way to squeeze it so you get bigger drops, and I couldn't figure it out, so I ended up using my fingers, and you can see those white areas blooming. Now here I'm using a combination of the Oxide Candied Apple and some of the regular Distress ink in Barn Door. My daughter was wearing shades of pink in the photo, and the neighbor boy was wearing red. I was going for a color sort of in between. Now the first droplets I hadn't dried the background, and you can see they also started mixing and blooming. That hadn't been my intention. So here I went and dried it up so I could put more droplets that'll stay in droplet form. More of the orange one, the spiced marmalade, and that mixture of the red ones. Here I brought over the Distressed ink Oxide in Hickory Smoke and the regular Distress ink in the same color because I wanted some gray but slightly darker. I have to keep in mind that with the Distress Oxides, it dries lighter than what you see when you first use it. It's milkier, kind of more opaque. So that's why I mixed in some of the regular Distress ink with it off the camera on my palette. And then I used the Studio Calico Mr. Huey's in Inky Black to add some black splatters. I'm really happy with how that came out. We're going to fast forward now to start putting the layout together. Here I have some choices I narrowed down. I wanted that black and white stripe, and I go off to take the strip off of this pumpkin background. The photos, pretty much I knew where I wanted, and there's the banner I'd already chosen. Now I went through before I started filming and just separated ephemera that I thought I might use on this layout. Here's the first thing I did that I regretted. I cut down the watercolor paper from 9 by 12 to 9 by 11, and then there was too much of the stripe. So I cut down the stripe, and that changes the feel I was going for with this layout. I didn't want to have like concentric squares or anything. I wanted it sort of off kilter with that rectangular feel in the middle. And I wanted to concentrate the color in the middle as well. I was feeling like the orange was just too bright behind there. You saw me rifle through a few other choices, and I just went back to that pumpkin one. Now, because I had cut some of the stripe and I was regretting it, I decided to stick it back together again, and that's actually going to work out okay. Although I'm looking at this back, and I love the back so much that I'm going to have to do something about preserving, because I really love those stars, and I don't have a second sheet of this. But right now, like, I put the stripe back on there so it covers more of the orange. I do like that better. Looking to see if I want it a little bit more centered or a little off-centered, which is usually my choice. but I wanted to leave myself some space in case I want to tuck something under or around the photos. It felt like they shouldn't be butted up against the edge there. Even though I was going to use this banner, and that's sort of the main focus of the embellishments, it just would have looked weird if there was nothing on the right as well. I've gone off camera and I've gutted the stripe paper with my Caterpillar Pro. Now, if you haven't seen it, I have a video on how to do that because I know that people have said in the past that if they buy a Caterpillar Pro, they have to keep a second one just to gut the paper. And I'm like, yeah, you can gut the paper. I did it right here. It even worked out with the strip that I had taped on at the bottom. I'll put a link to the video where I show you how to gut the paper with the Caterpillar Pro. Then I'm using my distress tool and my nails. I find that the distress tool doesn't work as well as I like. I did that with the stripe paper and a little bit with the watercolor paper, even though, because it's really thick, it was really hard to do. I also folded over the left-hand side of the stripe paper just for some interest. And I'm putting some layers of washi here also for interest. I think I saw a layout recently that had this sort of configuration on the right, and that's probably what influenced my decision. Trick or Treat is what I think I'm going to use as a title at this point, but it doesn't lay very well on that folded edge. I go off to get some doilies. I have black doilies, but they're not very lacy. They're quite thick, just like that other doily on the right there. It's a thicker sort of design, and I really love that really thin lacy look. So I went with the white doilies that I have that way. And they also remind me of spiderwebs, so that works out perfectly. Then here I'm trying to figure out how to decorate the side with the photos. I'm measuring the space because my first thought is let's do some paper layers. But then I decided that would just cover up too much of the mixed media that I did. But I don't want the photos to not have anything. So I am actually going to go with individual mats. That seems a bit outdated, but it seems to be one of my go-to designs. So I do make it a little different in that I mat each one with different paper, and then I don't have it completely surrounding the photo. I do cut them down so they overlap in some parts, and in other parts the photos are overlapping themselves. But I got ahead of myself. In the meantime, here I've just been auditioning some more ephemera. It seems that I have not made a Simple Stories layout without stars yet, and this will be no exception. I really liked the Boo Crew circle there, and it started competing with the Trick or Treat for title in my mind, but I haven't been able to work it out yet. So here I am with the cut pieces of paper to mat the photos. I wanted to keep it with the lighter papers just to add a little layer of something, but not really call attention away from the background so much. So I have got the text print there and a really light plaid. This other plaid would have worked really well with this last photo, I now realize, but I went with a polka dot thinking, well, I have stripes, I have another plaid, I had plaid on the side with the washi. Oh well, I ended up doing this polka dot and it works out nice. And you can see here what I mean about the overlapping. There are areas where the photos overlap each other rather than have the paper going around the entire photo. So this is where number 3 change comes along. This is a biggie. It was bugging me and I didn't know why. So I went away and I even tore it apart thinking maybe I just need to add some stitching. And in the end, what it was is I was not happy with the orange background. So I switched the background to white cardstock. It felt like the layout was getting too busy and I wanted to lighten it up, and I wanted to concentrate all the color in the middle. I flattened out the left-hand side so it isn't going to interfere with the Trick or Treat title. And here I am going to build everything back up. I decided up against stitching because I just didn't feel like it was going to add anything to this layout. Put the banner back on, put the trick or treat back on. That Boo Crew is still sort of making an appearance. If you've seen my other process videos, you'll know that I love word strips, and the ones in this collection are really cute because they look like washi, so I had to add a few of those. Getting my doilies out. I do like how wispy and spider webby like those are. By the way, if anyone's interested, I got those in bulk on eBay. They're called Cambridge white lace doilies, and they come in a couple different sizes depending on the seller. They're the ones that are popular with kit clubs like Felicity Jane because they're just so dainty and lacy. So if you're interested in those, check out eBay. Just look for Cambridge doilies. I have a confession to make. This collection is called Simple Vintage Halloween, and it is super full of vintage imagery. All those little kids and the black cats and the jack-o'-lanterns. They just look Victorian, but it's really not my style. So I did gravitate towards items that weren't too vintagey. Right here, I love, there are all these layered tabs in this collection. So I settled on this one here that doesn't have too much vintage in it. I stuck a little ticket down there, and then I'm moving everything over just to give myself a little more space. I thought maybe I'd write my journaling at the bottom corner. That spider was way too bright for that spot, so I am going to go with a bat that just doesn't take up as much visual weight. And then tabs. I love the tabs. I picked out the Wicked Good one. Oh, just flashed on the screen. That sticker that looks like a cluster of washi says the Boo Crew on it. So that's how I got the Boo Crew on there without using the bigger circle that didn't seem to fit anywhere. Then I also picked the In Disguise tab since they are costumes. While the vintage look isn't what I was going for, I did tuck in some vintage kiddos on the sides there. I particularly like how or the jack-o'-lantern kiddo is looking back at them surprised like that. I really like this now that I'm looking at it, adding another clustered tab at the bottom, but at the time I was thinking don't add too much, don't make it too dark. So I actually am going with a different direction on that front. But while I was making my decision, I went ahead and wrote out my journaling. It doesn't say much. It just says, look at those satisfied smiles as they sort through their candy loot. And I decided to fill in the little gap under the banner instead of doing the journaling at the bottom right, because I knew I was going to put some little clusters of embellishments down there and it was going to be too tight. I've been using the good old-fashioned micron pens. So what I was doing here was testing which width I like. I didn't want the journaling to be too dark and call attention to itself, but I didn't want it to be so light against the mixed media that it didn't show up. I settled on the 0.02 micron for the actual journaling and the 0.05 for the lines that I went ahead and drew under them. I didn't want the journaling to look like it was floating there. And erase all the pencil marks, and now I'm going to work on adding just a few little more touches. We're going to have some stars. My goal was to tuck them in under the layers to accentuate them and to just tie it in with the top because everything's concentrated on the top. I wasn't setting out to do a symmetric look. I did try to stagger the stars down there. I always feel that my layouts need little tiny things. So I went with enamel dots this time. They remind me of candy dots, and this layout is about them eating their candy. These first ones are Studio Calico Color Theory dots, and I'm just going to pick out the orange ones and the white ones. I'm having a hard time. My nails have grown out, but the little tiny dots are just so hard to pick up, especially when they stick to the paper so well. But here I am just scattering them around mostly where the stars are and my journaling. The darker yellow dots also fit the layout well. I had some more chipboard hearts and some die cut stars, but I didn't add those because I thought the chipboard stars by themselves worked well. Here I pulled some more enamel dots. This time I'm using the Laura Bellora. I've picked the mid-tone pink, which is sort of in between the pink and the red that photos have. Just about to reach the end. What's left is to add a date, and that's what I decided to do at the bottom of the layout, right underneath the word strips. Now there's one more thing I did, and it was off camera because I did it just standing up right before I took photos, and that was to extend the splatters to the other two layers. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate everyone who watches my videos, who leaves me comments and subscribes. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this layout and this process video, and I will see you here next time.